Hey friends, before we start on this incredible episode ahead, I want to invite you, as always, to step into courage, be brave, and amplify your voice through the power of podcasting. This month, I want to hear from you. Head over to podcastcoachingforkingdomentrepreneurs.com, and I want you to leave a recorded voicemail answering our question of the month. How do you find your own voice? When you leave a message, make sure you include your name, the name of your podcast. Yes, that's a little free promotion for you. And of course, your answer to the question. Your response might be featured in an upcoming episode. So don't miss this chance to share your insights and highlight your show within our community of Kingdom Entrepreneurs. All right. So just go to Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs, leave your voice message, and I can't wait to hear your voice and your story. Welcome to Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. I'm Kristin Chadwick, your podcast coach on this transformative podcasting journey. Our mission, empower Kingdom entrepreneurs to confidently launch and grow podcasts, fostering a journey of being seen, being heard, being known, and making a lasting kingdom impact. This is Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. Your voice matters. Hello, kingdom-minded entrepreneurs, podcasters, leaders. Today, we have a very special edition of Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs, where myself, my friend Megan Nilsen, Gretchen Heinen, and Andrea Anderson all sit down for an amazing roundtable conversation. This is definitely a longer episode, so prepare yourself that this is a really special episode that I encourage you to take the time to listen through the entire thing. And here's a little bit of a teaser on what you can expect throughout this episode. We're going to talk about emerging trends for entrepreneurs. We're going to talk about what does success really look like. We're going to talk about the hard question of when do you throw the towel in as an entrepreneur and go find a job, or how do you navigate that season of maybe not so much of abundance coming to light in the financial area. The other things that we're going to talk about towards the end of the conversation is warning signs as an entrepreneur, including those feelings of isolation and what you can do to combat that. So this whole episode is so full of wisdom and knowledge, and each of these women, including myself, we all bring unique gifts to the table, and we all need each other, and we all have something that God is working in us that is a gift to other people. And I love this collaboration. I love this conversation, and I know you will too. All right, here we go.
I'm Gretchen, and I am the founder of Daring Daughters, which is a company that helps women grow their business. And then I also grow two of my own businesses that I'm a part of that are in the healthcare space. One is in healthcare technology, and one is in opening medical clinics that are direct primary care.
Hey, I am Megan Nilsen. I live in Colorado Springs, and I actually started my life coaching business in 2020. Never, ever, ever, ever intended to be a business owner. And yet God had other plans, and each of the women on this call have really spoken into and encouraged me and advised me on my business journey. So it's been the joy of my life the last 4 or 5 years, and I've authored a couple of books. I host Kingdom Life Coaching podcast, and launching some kids. So getting those guys out the door so I can keep doing what I do.
And I'm Andrea Anderson. I'm in the Cleveland, Ohio area, but I was originally born in Canada. So if you hear me pronouncing certain words certain ways, that is where that accent is coming from. I am a PCC accredited coach through the International Coach Federation. I also am the founder of the Business Detox, which is my signature program. And that is really for Christian entrepreneurs who struggle with high functioning anxiety and want to really understand how that has been impacting their business growth. And we work on that area so they can start showing up with more clarity and confidence in how to really move their business forward in partnership with the Lord. I also have my own podcast by the same name as my program, the Business Detox. And like Megan, I'm also in the midst of launching kids into the adult world as well, while having a couple of them still at home.
And I am Kristin Chadwick. I am, oh man, I think just an entrepreneur at heart. I've been that way since I was a wee tyke. But I don't know if I really had the courage to do it until about 10 years ago, and even less 5 years ago on my own, and never really on my own because I feel like it's constantly made up of people all in this call of coaching and encouragement and community. And what I do is I get to help podcasters launch and grow their podcasts and come alongside them and cheer them on to amplify their voice. And my podcast is called Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. And I run a boutique podcast management company.
I love it. All podcasters in here. So that's cool. So this is going to be a fun conversation, I think. Okay. So emerging trends for Christian business owners. What are you guys seeing?
I mean, just to state the obvious, this is Megan. I think we live in a really, really cool time in technology and history, because if God is calling you to do something, to create something, to market something, sell something, you have everything at your fingertips to be able to do it. So the emerging trend, I feel like, is just the only thing really holding you back is you, because we live in a time and an age where the technology is there. You can, simply with your cell phone, you can create videos and message people and sell things. So I think it's really exciting. I guess the flip side of that coin is it can be overwhelming to think, well, I could do anything. What should I do? And how do I know what my message is and what I'm supposed to be doing? So, while it is a really great time in history to be equipped to sell and market and anywhere in the world, it also can be overwhelming. And there's a lot of noise because everybody knows that you can hop on and sell something at any time. So I think that's the flip side of that. And how do we cut through the noise is probably one of the biggest questions I think a lot of people have that I run into.
Yeah, I'm curious how you would answer that. How do you cut through the noise? What would you say to that, Megan?
Well, Kristin, I have this great podcast coach who helps me clarify my message. No, I do. And in all sincerity, on my only best answer is to be yourself, because the only way you can cut through the noise is if you have a message that resonates with you, that you are aligned with, that you know that God has put on your heart and equipped you to put out there. Otherwise, if you're trying to sound like someone else, look like someone else, I personally feel like it's going to be an effort and frustration. And somebody on the other side of that screen or that's listening to you is just going to sniff it out pretty quickly that you're not authentic. So love it or hate it, you have to be you. And I hope you love it because God created you. And so you got to go for it.
What's interesting though, what I've noticed, and I don't know if I would classify it as a trend necessarily, because trend to me implies like it's something that people want to jump on. But I've noticed, just based on the audience that I work with, that there are so many believers that question whether they're actually hearing from the Lord. And so then that creates that confusion of, are the messages that are resonating with me, or is what I feel like I'm called to? Am I really called to that? I see a lot of questioning around that, which just adds to that confusion. And there's almost this struggle because of that people have a hard time showing up as authentically, because there's just kind of like this spinning in confusion, like, who am I really? And is this really the right path? And has God really called me to it? So that's something that I've noticed. I don't know if any of you have noticed that as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think you add the enemy swirling around in the atmosphere, trying to cause confusion and chaos, plus people who aren't reading their Bible at all, or are new Christians or baby believers, or still drinking the milk, just not getting in the word. And then you add the fact that we have like 2 working parent households now in our era where the stakes are higher, kids are in sports, you have all of that added onto it. And then you're laying in bed going, is this what you're calling me to do, God? I totally see that. And I think it does cause a lot of anxiety for women because they're trying to juggle what's my capacity with what's my calling with. I know me, it does for me for sure. That's like the first question I ask is like, can I handle this? Like, which is the wrong question to ask because it's like, God, are you calling me to this? Okay, cool. I'm going to say declarations that you have equipped me to do this. So,
Yeah, this is Megan again. I think the other thing that comes up, and I would love maybe for you to answer this, Gretchen or Andrea, maybe you guys have been in business for a long time, but is that when people don't see immediate success, like income, all of a sudden they start to question, to your point, Andrea, maybe I didn't hear God right. This isn't what I'm supposed to be doing because dollars, income equals success in our human minds. And while that is a fruit, that is an indicator of success and that you're meeting a need that people want and they're willing to pay for, I think one of the trends might be that people might bail too quickly because they don't see the immediate income. And when you're looking, especially if you're on social media of any kind, you see people that at least look to the naked eye like they're really killing it and making a ton of money. And you're like, I'm not killing it. I'm not making a ton of money. Therefore, maybe I'm not doing the right thing. And so I would love for, any of you to speak to how have you personally, or how have you advised people to really bust through that? Because how do you know when to keep going? And how do you know when it is time to kind of hang it up and try something else?
Yeah, that's a really good question. This is Andrea here. So there's a couple things with that. A trend that I do see emerging is there's a lot of pushback against hustle culture because of people who have operated in hustle mode, because the messages that were communicated for years over social media were, you just have to push through, you need to grind away, and you have to try to work, like strive really toward this level of success. There's these images of success that so many people have held in their head, and then they just realize, oh my gosh, I'm really burnt out. And along with that trend is I'm noticing a lot, or not a lot is a very vague term, but I'm noticing more people that who have been in the business space for a while, and that others would say, oh my gosh, they're successful. They're bailing out, like they're done because they've operated in that hustle mode for so long. So I think there's that emerging trend. And I think, Gretchen, you had a podcast episode on this, like at some point last year, about where the younger generation is also like that lazy girl job thing. Like they're like, we don't want that kind of life. But my encouragement, the question of, is this the Lord directing me and I just need to be patient, or have I been operating completely in left field? The verse that the Lord keeps bringing to mind for me is, you reap what you sow. And so when I'm working with clients, part of that is looking at, well, not only what are you sowing, but how are you sowing it? How consistently are you sowing it? And like, let's make sure that you're actually doing the thing first. And part of that is also helping them to gain clarity on what God's voice sounds like in their business. Like, how do they know when it's the Lord versus when it's not? Like, it's not a cut and dried question. There's so many nuances to that. But I do see a lot of business owners bailing out too soon because they've bought into that illusion of kind of like that overnight success story. What I hope would become more of an emerging trend, and I think I am starting to see this, and also verify if you guys are seeing this too, where people are starting to be more transparent about the struggles that they're having, and a little bit more of the backstory. Because I think if we don't have the full picture of the backstory, then we can walk away with the illusion if you just do this, then everything's going to change. Well, it's more complicated than
So
like.
how would you define hustle versus consistency? And maybe Gretchen, you can speak to this if you've kind of done an episode on it, but I mean, to me, it's a fine line, right? Anti-hustle. So I can answer it what I think, but I'd love to hear from a couple of you.
Yeah, so you're hitting on like a major point that we've been dealing with this year just in our businesses is there are going to be seasons where you work way harder. And I think we got way too far away from like it was like hustle. I remember Instagram 10 years ago. It was like all the tiles with like the man with his Ferrari and it was like you grind or you're broke, and so it's like, oh, I gotta get to work. And then it kind of went the total opposite direction where it was like women who were getting on there and making a reel and being like, I worked 30 minutes and I made 12 grand today. That's really, really rare, and I just feel like if you don't love what God has called you to do and it feels like it's a grind, there is a kink in the hose, right? Like you should be waking up and being like, I can't wait to serve the Lord. I can't wait to help these people today that are in my business. And not saying that it's always going to feel like that, because like when you have to do taxes or bookkeeping or the things that are kind of, not your favorite or whatever. But like if my son went and got a job and he came home and he's like, I did the bare minimum today, I would be disappointed. I'd be like, what do you mean you did the bare minimum today? Like, no, that's not how I raised you. I raised you to go and out there. And so I'm trying to picture God when we're like, I want to show up and do the bare minimum, but I want to be rich. It's like, where is that in the Bible? That is not in the Bible.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think as you're talking, I think consistency is that sowing and reaping. It is kind of tilling that soil, planting that seed, watering it. We can't expect a garden to grow if we don't take care of it. And ask me how I know, because I have got 3 garden beds that basically have weeds in them. So I know this. And hustle, at least in my experience, I feel like hustle is tipping over into it's kind of bleeding into your relationships. You can't seem to like turn off your computer at a reasonable time and sit down and have dinner with your family, like whatever that looks like for you. If your core values and your core relationships are being infringed upon and starting to fray, then I think hustle has probably seeped into your business because you just can't seem to turn it off because you think you have to do it all. You have to be in control of it all. And if you're not monitoring it 24/7, like some sort of like NASA scientist, then something's going to go wrong. There's going to be some sort of, breach in the system. So I think, but it is nuanced. And to your point, Gretchen, there are times when we just have to work more in a season. If you're going to put on a retreat, heaven knows you're going to have to like work hard like the days and the months leading up to the retreat, but then when it's over, you put in those rhythms of rest. And I would love to hear kind of how do you either any of you 3 kind of put in those rhythms of rest knowing when big seasons are coming, and then how do you navigate that so you don't burn out?
I'll go. This is Kristin. Well, sowing and reaping is like my jam. I feel like the Lord has had me in these words for so long. More specifically, master and cultivate, which to me is like Megan, you're saying, understanding what season you're in, because there are winter seasons when it's time to hunker down and just rest and fatten up yourself and just receive and take in and be quiet. And then there's spring where it's time to flourish and it's time to grow and plant and cultivate the soil and making sure it has the nutrients inside of it. And I think for me in my own experience, being an Enneagram 9, peace is very important to me. So in the seasons of building business and yeah, as soon as I start to lose that piece is that question of, is this because I'm wanting my ego to go forward and strive and hustle? Or is this really God telling me I really need to just actually get the hoe out and I need to dig and pull out some weeds and keep going and I will give you rest. And I think there's a really beautiful distinction of trusting that he's in all of the seasons. So even if it is you are working more, or you have to pick up a part-time job, or you have to shift things around because kids are needing something a little bit more tangibly this season as they're launching or whatever. Just being sensitive to where the Holy Spirit is leading and being okay that he's got the other seasons in mind, and it's all going to grow in its time. It's going to harvest in its time. It's going to let the soil rest in its time, and trusting in that. One of my most favorite quotes of all time from Graham Cook is "Rest is a weapon." And I love that because I feel like in every season, having that truth stuck in my brain of like, yep, I can pause and like think about Jesus is relaxed in this moment, and I can just pause and rest. Even if it is a hustle season, I can pause and be at rest, even in the midst of working hard.
Kristin, I love that you said, get a part-time job if you need to, because I feel like this is another thing that I'm seeing is all of a sudden somebody starts a business and it's like this blasphemous cardinal sin if you say, hey, have you considered like, getting a job? Because like, I haven't made money in 6 months and I can barely keep the lights on. And I don't know what we're going to do if I don't make money tomorrow. And there's this huge pressure. And I think, well, what if you can do both? I personally believe there's seasons where you're not giving up on your dream. You can still focus with efficiency in some area. And oh, by the way, go get a W-2 job to help meet ends, the ends meet in the in-between time. So I'm curious if that's like a hot take. Sometimes as a business coach, I'm like, hey, don't tell your other business coach, but I'm telling you, I think you might need to get a job for like a hot minute, but I'm still going to help you build your dream. So it can be tricky.
Okay, I have to tell you guys a funny story about this. Okay, so I went from basically a business that's, Instagram business and, the whole online business. So I went from that for several years to startup world. And in startup world, those people make no money for like years. They live on other people's money. They literally go to people and are like, bro, give me $1 million while I build this business, right? And it was so funny to me because it was so taboo to have a job in the Instagram world because it means that maybe you're not doing that well or whatever. There's all kinds of wackadoo, belief systems that people will believe about or they don't want to tell people they have a job, or they have like an Instagram version of themselves, but then they actually like have this whole corporate version that no worlds mix, And then I went to the startup world where everyone's broke until they're basically like a bazillionaire, and they go from zero to bazillion, and then they're like famous and all this stuff. And I was just like, we have lost our minds with this idea that we have to make it look a certain way or it was so refreshing actually to get to the startup world because I was like, oh, it's like totally normal to be broke like in this world. And it was so opposite. So I 100%, I've had a full-time job as a nurse many times in business because I'm like, hey, we want to buy a house, or, you guys have heard me say this same thing. Like, I think you have to take care of your family, and that's going to be a lot of different ways. Think of Proverbs 31. She had like 8 different things going on at once,
Yeah, I know for myself, if my husband's job didn't allow me to not work at like a normal job, while I'm building my business, I would have had to go out and get a job. And so I hope whoever is listening to this hears that, yeah, it is okay. If you're at financial straits, it's not wrong and there's no shame in doing that. And actually one of my other friends who started her own business, she had the opportunity to start working in a chiropractic office part-time. And she said it was actually really refreshing because you're seeing a different aspect of business, and it was taking the pressure off of her, because in startup phase, like, we have to be realistic that it can take time. Now, some business models will allow you to accelerate to sustainable income faster than others. But yeah, if you need money to be able to pay your bills, then God will open up other doors. It just doesn't have to be put all your eggs in this basket.
Yeah, it's like pride, ego
Yeah.
and pride, I think, are what drives that. So
So how do you continue to like push through economic uncertainty or whatever? Like, can any of you speak to a season where you're like, I'm not sure I can keep doing this anymore, but you knew the call on your life was so strong from the Lord? Like, Kristin, I feel like you can speak to this, but maybe I'm calling you out. Like, how do you navigate that? And yeah, when
Oh,
when finances are tricky.
yeah. I mean, we recently just walked through a really tough season. And to be honest, both my husband and I, um, we decided to, the story where he lays out the fleece, in the Bible. So we both felt like God was calling both of us to lay out my business, and just offer it of like, you know what, I surrender. If it's time for me to be done with podcasting and go find a full-time position, I surrender it. Was it easy? No, absolutely not. I mean, there were tears, there were lots of conversation, walks and talks and tears. And like, I can't believe like that he would have me surrender when this is totally who I am, like as a person. And yet it's it was a beautiful place to be in, of this totally open-handed, and then the Lord answering in a beautiful way back into my business again, and being open to whatever he has next for our family. And so I think the positioning of being willing to let it go, which he's done that to me a few times, and with multiple different businesses and ministry, of just being open-handed, but he always has something better. And that's just what I know of him. That if he's going to take something for a season, that he's going to replace it with something even better.
Yeah.
And then the day to day, I mean, it's just trusting that he is provision, and it may not look like a paycheck, like you were saying. It may look like just encouragement from a friend or somebody. For me, when this was all going down, it was like every other day I would get some sort of text message or a message on Instagram, and it was like, "Oh, your podcast was so helpful with da 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 da." And I was like, "Okay, Lord, I hear you."
Yeah, I was going to
And
ask you what were some of the things, because if you have a fleece and you're like, hey, this whole business could fold. I mean, you've put a
Mhm.
lot of blood, sweat, and tears and prayers into this podcast coaching editing business. So you were ready to potentially close the doors, is what I'm hearing.
Mhm.
And then
Well,
and then
yes,
how
ish.
how did the Lord, like, text messages that people are listening to your podcast, but how did he answer to say, actually keep going, don't give up, in fact, double down?
It was actually an influx of people being interested in what I had to offer. That was one side of it. The other side was actually watching my husband's business be blessed, tremendously by like incoming clients. And so that has been cool. And something that I've learned was it's not just up to me either. Like we're a team. And when I'm praying and releasing this fleece of, it's not all up to me, even though I do know that head knowledge wise, it was more of like, can I align my heart into prayer for my husband's business for the sake of all of us, and not just like, it's hard to explain. Like it was like my vision for what God was doing was so much broader than just what is my business doing. And now it was like, what is Joshua, my husband, and I's business doing together, and what is our family doing together as well. So, um, yeah. And I mean, we're so like right on the other side of it that it feels a little fresh, but just on the tangibles, it was more of like, okay, now there's an influx in clients on my side and on his side. And we've actually come together more in union as a couple than we were 4 months ago because we had to powwow and pray together. Yeah.
I think that's super cool. This is Megan. Because what I hear you're speaking to also is like community and the power of collaboration. And, the other trend I might speak to would be this idea that you are alone, that you are a solopreneur. We now have that word exists. I'm a solopreneur. I have my personal brand. And so maybe a lot of us spend time by ourselves, literally sitting in my home by myself. Well, not really. My kids are loudly making lunch, but you know what I mean? Like I'm a solopreneur. And so I could think it is up to me by myself to make this work, to get the traction. And I love what you're speaking to, Kristin, is that if you are married or if you are in partnership with someone else, it's not just about you. And God can provide through so many avenues and so many means. And there's a humility and a vulnerability involved when it's like, hey, maybe this big influx of cash actually isn't going to come through my business yet or now. And he's providing it through your husband's business. Isn't God still providing? And yet there's kind of a ding to the ego when we're like, oh, well, I mean, I think if I'm honest, and maybe a lot of listeners, you want to go, oh, well, that was my thing that was successful, But as Christian entrepreneurs, I think we have to redefine, and I know you talk about this a lot, Andrea and Gretchen too, but like redefine like what is kingdom success? Is money the main and only fruit, or are there other things that God is building and bringing to fruition that may or may not include finances?
Yeah, definitely. Success is a much broader perspective. I mean, if you think about it in terms of God, it's on the level of eternity, right? Because we know that any money that we make here, we're not taking it with us. Like our treasure that we're storing up is in heaven, or the real treasure is the treasure that we're storing up in heaven. So I think there's so much freedom when we broaden our definition of what success looks like, right? Because if it's narrowed down to look how much money I made, or look how many followers I have, or like look at how many things I can add to my resume. But if you are consistently deprioritizing time with the Lord, and that also speaks to like the hustle and rest, right? Like that's one of the questions, or to me, a red flag if someone is hustling, if they're not comfortable with rest, is where does time with the Lord fall in your calendar? And if you feel like you are too busy to have, more than like a 2-minute conversation with him, pretty sure the Lord isn't going to be like, yay, you're like, but look at all the success you have. He wants time with us. He wants that relationship. And also looking at what are the qualities that are being developed, right? Because I really have seen how, and I'm sure you all could agree with this statement, that if God calls you to the business space, he is going to use it to sanctify you. Like there's been such a huge sanctification process that has gone on for me. And I've seen that in my clients too, that seeing how he brings us from strength to strength and glory to glory. And it's like, those are the qualities, the things that are going to last into eternity. That's where we need our focus. And then just trusting him for the things that, again, we can't take with us. We kind of need on some level here. Like we do need money. We do need to bring people into our circles so that we can have clients, have customers. But at the end of the day, it's who are we becoming in the process that I know the Lord really cares about.
That's good. That's good. It kind of segues into something I want to ask you, Kristin, because you talk a lot about this. We're talking about people stepping into their calling, not measuring it with just money. But what about when the people, I think women especially, are like, I'm not equipped. I don't have a strong enough voice. I'm not confident enough. I don't know enough. I feel like so many people don't start the business because they just have this limiting belief. And you I feel like you have a good answer or you have insight on that.
Oh man. Well, for me, and I can only speak to how God has helped me blossom more and more into who he has created me to be, um, is I had to, going back to Andrea, what you had said way earlier in the conversation was really understanding my identity. And I had to hear that personally from him, like not just scripture, which scripture is great. It's an anchoring truth for sure. Um, yes, I want to be the Proverbs 31 woman. I know I'm a daughter of the King. Um, I know that I am his beloved. And for me, the shifting of my limiting beliefs and breaking off some of that imposter syndrome of who am I really came from a very personal word from Holy Spirit of calling me his peacock, which is a whole long story, and you can listen to that in some of my other podcasts. But for me, that is like the utmost importance of what does the Father call you? In Revelations, it says he calls you by name, and it's written on the inside of your thigh, and we will know that name when we're in heaven. And I can only imagine how sweet, like if you think about your husband or a dear friend that calls you a nickname, um, like my husband calls me babe, which before we were married, I would have been like, nobody's ever going to call me babe. But there's something so sweet about us calling each other babe. Or like my mom calls me Chris Pot. Nobody else calls me Chris Pot. Like there's such a sweetness of that. So when I hear the Father in this testimony of him saying, "You're my peacock," which growing up, my limiting belief was, I'm in the back of the room. I am baby in the corner. Nobody puts baby in the corner. That was like Jesus calling me out of like, you need to come out into the middle of the room and shine who you are. And that right there is so key in anything that God is calling you to do. I mean, I've been reading through Joshua lately, and just that like calling him out of like, hey, you're to be strong and courageous. You have no idea what you're going to do in the next years of calling people into battle and to conquering Jericho. And that's what it is for women in business right now, especially as believers, of like, you have no idea what you're about to go step into. And that's why it's so important to anchor yourself into identity biblically. Oh my gosh, biblically. Oh my gosh, what is happening with my words? From the Bible, truth, and sit and listen. It's like, what is he calling you? What's the nickname that he's calling you? And then from there, you can build off of this relationship and this sweet intimacy that only you and him will really truly understand. Um, that's where I would start from, is you have to know who you are, so that when you hear that lie of who am I to start a business, you can say, well, I know that he calls me this, this, and this, and I am created for this.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think just on a practical level, I think what if you just sat down and wrote down a list of any author you've ever enjoyed, any product you've ever loved, any message you've ever received or sermon you loved, or I mean, just the list can go on of ways that other people's work, service, and products have poured into your life. The list is rather infinite if you've lived a while on this planet. And so you look at that list and insert your name, like Kristin is saying, who are you not to, it's like the Marianne Williams quote or whatever, like, who are you not to shine, right? Like, I just, and I don't want to be cliche about it. I just think there's room for everybody at the table. And so I think part of the mindset block that we come up against is somebody's already said that, somebody's already done that, somebody already shared their testimony and did their thing and created that product. And so I'll just let them do it. And first of all, I would say please do let them do it. And in fact, encourage them to do it. Like the last thing we want to be doing is like arm wrestling over whose piece of land this is, right? But at the same time, I think there's room for everybody. And when you start sharing your message and you start displaying, who you are created to be, your peacock feathers as they were, your thumbprint, your feathers are different than anybody else's that's ever been or ever what will be. And so God, like trusting that he is so intentional and so detailed and so sort of intimate and personal that he can use you in the way he wants to do that and with whom he wants to do that. That's his to decide. But if you withhold, I really truly believe like if you don't step into your calling, you are withholding blessing from other people. No, of course yourself, because you're not going to experience the full energy and joy and fulfillment that you could personally. But I really do believe that you're withholding blessing from your kids if they're watching you. I think it's really, really cool to watch a parent. In this case, if we're speaking to women, moms, really dive into something because your kids are paying attention and they're watching you try something that you're maybe, nervous about. And you can be honest about like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm doing this. I'm nervous about this. And it might be amazing and I might fail, but that's okay. They're watching adjust and pivot and it will bless them. It will bless the people around you, either in your peer group or in generations kind of younger than you, to see you doing something that will inspire and encourage them to do something that it's okay to get out there, try, be courageous, make mistakes. So that to me, that speaks very practically to something that might help, kind of bust up against that mindset block.
Yeah, and I've seen that play out in my own business walk and just honestly feeling devastated that I didn't believe the Lord when I knew I knew he called me to life coaching 17 years ago because I literally heard that phrase in a time of prayer. And so I was obedient to get the coaching certification because 17 years ago, the coaching industry was virtually unheard of. And so I was like, well, if he's calling me to this, I better figure out how to do it. But then I allowed circumstances at the time. And at the time, my 3 children were 3 and under. The idea of an online business wasn't even a thing. But I allowed that essentially as an excuse to stop me from figuring out how to move forward because it was like, how am I going to do this? Who's going to pay me? Like, what's the real value in this? And I've seen that show up throughout my business journey, or just the messages that the Lord has continued to speak. And that it's the Lord speaking to you if you keep getting the same messages over and over again, especially over a period of years. And then seeing when I would take steps toward it, I'm like, okay, I need to go for this. And then I would start to do the things and then doubt would enter in and all of like that imposter syndrome and all of that. And so now looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, if I just stuck with it, if I'd actually believed that because the Lord was calling me to it, like he would help me figure it out, he would be with me, I would be so much further ahead than today. So my encouragement, if you're listening to this and you're in a period of doubt and you're not sure, if the Lord keeps bringing this to your heart and you're delighting yourself in him, if you're putting him, top priority, you can trust like that desire is from him and that you're meant to go after it. And like Megan said, if you don't, you are withholding blessing. You are withholding that blessing from yourself. You're blocking it. You're telling God, okay, yes, I want it, but no, I don't, which is double-minded. But you are also withholding that blessing from the people that he would have for you as well. So I know all of us would be cheering you on to say, just go for it. Trust that God is going to show you the way.
You know what I always say too, in addition to all those great wisdom, what's the worst that can happen? Literally, the worst that can happen is you have to go get a job and you're in a little bit of debt or a lot of bit of debt. But even if you're in debt, like there's solutions out of that, right? So what's the worst that can happen? Like to me, when I go, okay, what's the worst that can happen? The worst thing I can think of is I'm living under a bridge with my family. And I'm sure there's worse things, but that's always the one that comes in my mind. It's like we're all under the bridge. And I'm like, okay, what would you do if you were under the bridge? Well, I'd find a homeless shelter. Okay, then what would you do? I'd talk to the social worker. Then what would you do? I'd try to find a job. Then what would you do? We'd try to get low income housing. Then what would you do? You know what I mean? It's like there's always a way out. So why not just give it a go? Like, ask yourself, what is literally write it down. What is the worst that can happen?
I was just reading something in a newsletter today that said, I forget who it was that did a study of successful people, but they said the one quality or the one pattern that they saw in people that would be seen as successful wasn't their skill sets, it wasn't the accolades or anything like that. It was that they had grit. Like they chose to stick it out, to figure it out, to get back up every time they fell flat on their face. And I'm like, isn't that such an encouragement, right? Like you just know if I just stick with this, certainly seek wise counsel and learn along the way. But I don't know, that was just like, it was just a cool affirmation.
That's so good. And the other thing that's coming to mind is like, to your point, Gretchen, I love how you're like kind of going down the lane of like figuring things out. As Marie Forleo says, everything's figure outable, right? And especially if you have the Lord, he's going to help you figure things out. Is also like, what's the truth? Like, are you alone? And I was actually on a podcast interview the other day, and somebody was asking me maybe some of the biggest challenges or maybe cautionary tales for entrepreneurs. And I think it's back to the solopreneur, that this idea that you are alone. And when you are starting to isolate, I think it's dangerous territory. And, you know, when we think of anything in scripture, really, I'd be hard pressed to think of something where God said, you're going by yourself. Nobody else is going to be with you. Like most of the time, God is giving a partner or a community of people that are walking into this new thing, taking new territory, battling together. So, you know, if you get in the mindset where you're like, I don't know who I am to do this, then start talking to the people that love you and that you love and that can speak words of wisdom. I mean, I think we always should be in a posture of wisdom. I mean, I'm not saying go out and do whatever the heck you want. I mean, go out and do it. If as long as you're not hurting anybody, you could, what's the worst that can happen, right, Gretchen? But there is common sense and wisdom that if you just maybe pull a couple of, you know, kind of godly mentors, you might be able to stay on track a little bit more. But I think to be really careful about thinking that you're on your own and asking the Lord how he's providing, like we were talking about with Kristin and Joshua and the finances, like how is he providing this just outside of maybe a myopic view that you might have of you by yourself. So I'd be curious how you all have found encouragement and staying power and really success by jumping into community. Like, what does that look like as a business owner? It is your business, your LLC, right? Like at the end of the day, it's just you filing your taxes, but how have you found this greater community to really be pivotal in your business enjoyment and success?
I want to add one other question on top of that. How have you found it? But also, what have you done about spousal support? Because some women don't have the support of their husbands. They're like, go get a job. This isn't going to work. Your hobby, mine called mine a hobby for many years. Like your hobby isn't paying the bills. So I'd love to know what you guys did for your own community support, but also how do you deal with like a husband if they're not supportive? And I know not everybody's married who listens to this podcast, but for those that are, that could really bless.
Okay, I have an awesome episode that my husband recorded with me, and it was all about what do you do when your husband's not on board? And I think a dude can only speak to a dude about that. And it's awesome. So I'll put a link in there because it really was, I was like, Joshua, I feel like you got something to say to husbands. Because he's world class on supportive. So that's the answer to that side of the question, Gretchen. But on the other side, I feel like it is very tempting to feel like you are alone in this entrepreneur space. And as somebody who is an introvert, I can get real comfortable being at home, in my office, um, go online, connect with people online, and be content with what I've done for today. But this is something that the Lord has taught me in the last year and a half was I have to have boots on the ground, even in the uncomfortableness of being an introvert. And so for me personally, it looks like joining a co-working space that's 25 minutes from here. It gets me out of my comfortable zone. I have to actually take a shower and go in. And every time that I go, I walk away so fulfilled purely because I have interacted with other human beings in real life who are similar in a similar space and similar entrepreneurs who are maybe they're in a nonprofit or they're building a real estate business and maybe it's different businesses that we're building, but the connection point of like we're getting coffee at the same time and we actually ask each other and look each other in the eye in real life and talk about life is so key. And I tell my podcasters too, of because a lot of podcasters will say, I don't know how to create content over and over and over again. And my first question is going to be, are you in connection in real life with your ideal listener? Because if you're not, and it's just online, there's something off. Like you've got to have some sort of real life connection with your person. And so that would be where I have found that it's very helpful. And of course, hiring coaches and in certain seasons has been helpful too, to not feel alone in this space.
Yeah, I'd agree. This is Andrea. I'm so grateful for the in-person women's networking group that I've been a part of for years. Just being able to walk into that room a couple times a month and interact in person. And it's not a Christian group per se, but there are a lot of believers in there, and just the encouragement that you get from being in that space and the ability to share the struggles and just know that they are there to lift you up. The Lord has also had me be intentional about looking for collaborative opportunities as well, just recognizing that I leaned more to the introverted side as well. And so I don't love necessarily filling up my calendar with like having to go out, but being able to have pockets where I'm connecting with others, especially other believers. To speak to the spousal support side, thankfully, the Lord has blessed me with my husband who has been largely supportive of me. But I know that with the income piece, and this touches on a couple things we were talking about earlier, like when you're in a place where your business isn't generating income in a significant way, and that definition of significant will mean different things to different people. I know there's been times where he's like, is this really worth it? Because he sees how hard I work, and what I'm pouring out. And in the times where I've expressed frustration, and there's times where I've even been like, Lord, like, take this away from me. Like, why have you called me to this if it's been such a struggle? And almost saying to him, like, here, you take it, like, just get me a job, and he's never done that. Like every time kind of the push comes to shove for me to think about stopping, I've never felt peace about that. And in a more recent conversation I had with my husband, I'm like, listen, like, I could go out and do that, but I know it would be walking in disobedience, because I know, like, if I didn't have that almost audible phrase from the Lord, like life coach, I would have walked away from this years ago, because sometimes it feels easier to walk away than it does to stay the course.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as far as spouses, I've often kind of counseled women in this area, and I've kind of had to kind of do this myself, is just how honest can you be with your husband? Because if that's the dynamic we're talking about, you are the wife and you're starting this, hobby, as you would say, Gretchen. And I think, how can you really get clear on what you love and what you value, and what God's calling you to do, to your point, Andrea, of being obedient to something he's calling you to do. And also, just saying like, but what does our family need? Like, I think the caution is that what can happen is maybe the guy traditionally, right? If your husband's working and he's more of a traditional provider scenario, and he's kind of like, what are you doing? You're not really helping the family. My caution and hesitation is if you just say, you're right, I should quit, I'm going to go get a job, you are really at distinct in jeopardy of becoming really bitter, because you're like, you made me quit. You told me I couldn't do this. You. And so anytime that I feel like, the enemy can kind of come in and make a division between husband and wife is very concerning. Now, you might need to go get a job. That might just be the actual outcome. But the process to me is so important, because if you don't let the process kind of sit and simmer and be honest and share your heart as much as possible with him, he's never really going to understand the level of passion you have, the level of interest that you have, the level of a joy that it brings you. And then you get to decide, okay, is this a hobby? And I don't want to quit writing or podcasting or whatever because it brings me life. And I'm also going to go get a job. Or, I just think you just have to have really honest conversations. So I would caution anybody to just kind of throw it in because they're afraid to really share what they're truly thinking and how much this means to you.
I think oh, go ahead.
I think too, what is important to look at is your own confidence level. I believe, because I've had conversations with women about this, is if in some way you aren't 100% confident in what the Lord has called you to, 100% confident that even if you haven't figured out how to go about it, and you're having a conversation with your husband about the business, like he is going to pick up on your lack of confidence, right? Because we're masters at picking up on the subtleties of body language and tone and all of that, especially if in a marriage relationship, or ideally in a marriage relationship. And so we also have to watch, what are the words that we're speaking about our business to our husbands? If we are speaking death over the business, if we're speaking uncertainty and frustration and struggle, sometimes I think the pushback, I guess, from our husbands might be, hey, I'm hearing you say this is frustrating. I'm hearing the struggle. And I think there's something in men, like they're problem solvers, right? So why wouldn't they want it? It's almost like, you're struggling with this, why don't you just go get a job? Instead of also hearing, no, I really want to do this. Like, I want you to champion me in this. Like, maybe we need to articulate that to our husbands, but we also have to realize what's really going on for ourselves at the same time. Do we really believe we can do this? If not, our husbands might be like, hey, I'm hearing like you kind of maybe want not to do this anymore. So I'm telling you, you don't have to do this anymore.
So good. I was just going to say that this is all part of you using your voice and speaking what you know that God has called you to do. And what you're saying, Andrea, that confidence piece is so important, of even in the trial, like being confident that you've got Jesus backing you up. And it reminds me of Gretchen, who taught in the Daring Daughters mastermind about how the Kyle woman is blessed by her husband. Like, that whole thing is a blessing over, and like people still do it to this day in the Jewish culture on Sabbath, like at the Friday night dinner, the man speaks a blessing over the woman's business and her life and her heart and her spirit. And I think that's just such a beautiful picture of how the Father is always going to be speaking over us as women, a blessing over our business and whatever we put our hands to, whether that's going to get a full-time job or part-time job, or it's going into your business even more wholeheartedly. Yeah. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Yes, that is good. I love that. I love the Kyle story for sure. And, since I had a husband that wasn't supportive and now is 100% supportive, I think I'll share a little bit about like how we got to that, because I think there's sometimes like either just the husband who's always been that way in support of his wife, and then there's the ones who feel like they're never going to get there for some women. And I don't see a lot of times that someone goes from one extreme to the other, but in my case, it happened. So I had some businesses that my husband didn't really believe in. Like I believed in them, but he did not believe in them. And, he was really resistant to me spending time on these businesses because he did not see that they could scale. He did not see that they were ever going to really truly provide worth it. I think Andrea, you might have said this, or someone said this, like, is this worth it? You know what I mean? For our family. Um, And there was a moment where that was really frustrating for me. In fact, we actually went to counseling and did a lot of stuff because this was just like, it really did cause bitterness, like you're saying, Megan. Like it caused me to be bitter and be like, well, why is your job more valuable than what I want to do? And why is, and what I found worked the best for us, and this is just my own circumstance, was me learning how to serve my husband in a way that met his needs, and him learning how to understand my dreams. Like it took both of us to kind of cross the bridge and be like, okay, I want to understand why you want to do this business. I want to understand why is this important to you? And for me to go, what does he need? Right? Because maybe all these calls I'm on at night and all this stuff that he's having to do because I'm doing this business is a strain for him, but I'm like over here being selfish and being like, well, I deserve this too. And me. You know what I mean? But instead of just being like, what do you need from this? And the most in about, I would say about 3 or 4 years ago, he really flipped. He really changed completely. And so when I approached him about the businesses that I'm working on right now, and I was like, okay, listen, I like didn't just say, oh, I'm going to do this. Like we had a family meeting and it was like, hey, I have this idea. Like I pitched it to him. I'm like, this is my idea. I want to know what you think. If this isn't for our family and you don't, we got to pray about this together. Like we kind of came together to make the decision versus me being like, I'm going to start a business and this is what I want to do and you need to support me. And we talked about like, okay, how are we going to do the finances while we do this? Because we knew I wasn't going to make any money in this business for like 2 years, and what do we do and in fact, not only was I not going to make any money, like I couldn't go get a job because a lot of the stuff I'd be competing with, there'd be like non-compete stuff going on. So I couldn't go and work. I had to just do it this way. Anyway, so I just feel like if you're in that place, first of all, I feel you if you're in that place where your husband isn't supportive. It can be isolating and it can feel frustrating. And that's where, these conversations, Kristin's podcast about it, and a community, right? You can find communities for free on Facebook. You can join networking groups for like $50 or less a month. Like everyone in this room has communities that you could be a part of. And so go find each, we're going to put the links to each of our podcasts. So then you can go and find each other and you can find communities to be a part of. Just recently, I connected one of our Instagram followers with some of you guys because I was like, hey, this chick's looking for a community that I don't have. Like, do you guys have anything? Like, there are things out there and there are Christians who want to be inclusive and want you to grow and want to fold you in and bring you into the fold. So keep looking for those communities. Some you have to pay for, that's just get used to that because this is how we feed our families. Right. But like, and some of them you have to pay for because it does kind of level up the community a little bit, like it really does kind of help there be serious people in the room. So that would be my 2 cents on that topic.
I think what was also coming to mind too, Gretchen, as you were speaking, is seeing our husbands as an accountability partner in this, because I love that you shared, you actually went to your husband and pitched him, right? Instead of just being like, hey, I'm doing this. And I think in that conversation, it's also understanding what our husbands' perspectives are. Like, is it if it is the finance piece that they're concerned about, then going back to the job conversation we were having it's like, that's why there's no shame in it. If it's really like you really want to do the business and your husband is saying, and I need you to help with this income piece, then going back to what Megan was saying really early on, because of the time that we're living in, there are business models out there that allow you to start a business more easily, right? To get you started. Or one thing that I regret not doing is even working at a business like 30 minutes a day. If I had worked 30 minutes a day for like 10 years, again, I would be so much further. But I think in our minds, we have this idea of it has to look a certain way, or we have to put in so many hours, and doing anything less is somehow less significant. So I think it is also understanding our husband's perspectives. I know one of the challenging points that we faced early on when I was getting into the online business space is the amount of time I was spending on my phone. Like, first of all, my husband doesn't love the phone to begin with, like even for himself. And then suddenly seeing me being on a phone all the time, like for me, I'm like, well, this is how I meant to grow my business, but it was perceived as I am not present. And granted, I did not use wisdom in boundaries because of that hustle mentality. So I think part of it is having these conversations about what does accountability look like what are the boundaries we do need to put in place, but also helping our husbands to understand what is needed if we are serious about growing a business.
This is good. This is real good. This has been so fun. I've had a good time. Maybe we should tell people how to find us, what we have out there, just different, things where people can engage. What do you guys think about that?
Sounds great.
Yeah, that's great.
I
Yeah,
think
and maybe even what kind of services you provide, so people would know, oh, I should reach out to Gretchen or Andrea or whoever. I guess I'll go. Obviously, this is Megan. You can go listen to my Kingdom Life Coaching podcast. I'm having a blast interviewing people about how they hear the voice of God, how their faith has ebbed and flowed over the years, and really help them get aligned with God's voice and walk activated in those things that he's calling them to, in obedience, as you mentioned, Andrea. And so that I'd invite you to come meet me over there for sure. And then I think in the business space, if you're listening and you're kind of a coach or a content creator, a course creator, maybe you want to write or podcast, but you're not exactly sure where to start. I feel like I just love connecting with people at the very beginning when you have kind of a Holy Spirit stirring, a nudge, an inkling, a thought that maybe you're shifting from one thing to the next, or adding a layer to what God's calling you to share and provide for the world. Then hit me up. You can find me on my website, meganbnilsen.com. And I'll throw a link on all of the show notes represented here on this podcast. But I have a brand new 4-part course called What Not Who, how to unlock your heart message so you can reach your who. And really, this is a pushback on, and maybe some of you will laugh at this, but I feel like as business owners, I hear so much, you have to know your who, you have to know your who. Yes, but to the point where they're saying, what magazines do they read and what did they order on Amazon and what are they doing, on their fourth Thursday of the month? I'm like, I don't know what my person's doing. I just know what I'm supposed to share. So I'm saying if you know your what and you know what you're supposed to share as far as your product, service, in this regard, really message, then your who will resonate and they will find you because you will be so clear and so passionate, they'll come to you. So What Not Who, we'll drop the link so you can get half off of that. It's super affordable.
Megan, you're awesome. And I think you should come and talk about your message on my podcast.
Done.
All right. Well, so I would love to talk to anybody who is listening to all of this and you are feeling that stirring, the whispering of, I want to start a podcast. I'm ready to start a podcast, but I'm overwhelmed on where to start. that's who I would love to chat with. So I do offer a free call to kind of wrap my head around where you're at and to point you in the right direction. So I will post a link in the show notes for us to set up a time to meet and talk about your dream podcast.
Okay, I'll go. This is Andrea again. So I would love to have you meet me over on the Business Detox podcast. I also talk there a lot about partnering with God, hearing God's voice for your business, and calling out some of those things in the marketplace that kind of bog us down. But I'd also love to offer, and I'll put a link for this too, a business detox audit, because one of the top needs that I hear business owners saying is that they need clarity. They need to understand why things aren't working in their business, maybe why they're struggling to get leads in, why they're struggling to get sales calls and to convert. And what I've learned even for myself is that we're often too close to our businesses, right? We all have blind spots, and because God has created us for relationship, which is one of the things that we were touching on earlier, God creates us. We're not solo entrepreneurs, right? We need other people. So we sometimes need those other people to help point out things that we haven't been able to see for ourselves. And that's really what the purpose of the audit serves. So you'll let me know what your offer is, what platform you're promoting it on, lead magnet sales, so that I can take a look at it, pray about it, and then we'll have a follow-up feedback session so I can show you some of the things that the Lord was highlighting to me, and then we would come up with an action plan for what you can do about that.
That's so good. I love all of your businesses. I think they're so cool. And I love that there's so much really good experience in business with the four of us, because it really is necessary, I think, to get different perspectives. Like I love listening to a variety of podcasts, right? Because it helps you kind of flesh out this piece and this piece and this piece. So I think that I would encourage anyone listening to this to really go and dive into the four podcasts that are here, because you will very likely get everything you need for business just right here in this room. And I could say that with confidence. So I guess for me, Daring Daughters is about being bold and being bolder than you are and going further. And we really seek to serve people who know that they have a massively big calling and they just don't know how to put the steps in place. And so I'll put a link for the method that we used. So after like running 3 years worth of masterminds with women, I realized I do the same 5 things over and over, no matter what the business is. And so we put together basically like an ebook that has the 5 things that we do with every business, which is seek God, serve your person, sell them something, scale it, and then come up with a sending plan, which means, what am I going to do with this business when I'm ready to be done? Am I going to retire? Am I going to have a 401k? Am I going to sell it? So we do the same thing with every business, no matter what it is. So I'll put a link for that in our show notes too. So awesome. This is great. Any final parting words anybody has?
No, it's just fun hanging out with you all, and we could talk forever and ever and ever. So if someone's listening and they're getting that little stir, then just what's the next right step for you? What's the next right step? That's it. Do that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right.
Love each of you.
Love you. All right. Bye, Lynn.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye. Thanks for listening today. Hey, I want you to know that there is an opportunity for you and I to connect. I would love to do that. Find a link below and we can schedule a one-on-one free 15-minute consultation. I want to hear, where are you in your podcasting journey and how can I help serve you and help you bring that kingdom impact dream into reality?